Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. So people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed. Owl after owl sped overhead. Them had never seen them, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, normal, all-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite.
Her long hair had a faintly mossy look about it. She had said nothing. Apart from indicating the couch and offering him the wine, she'd done no more than sit watching him, occasionally rubbing a deep scratch on her arm. Rincewind hurriedly recalled that a dryad was so linked to her tree that she suffered wounds in sympathy. Sorry about that, he said quickly. It was just an accident. I mean, there were these wolves and...
I had to climb my tree, and I rescued you. And for your friend, perhaps.
Friend?
The little man with the magic box.
Said the dryad. Oh, sure, him, said Rincewind vaguely. Yeah, I hope he's okay.
He needs your help.
Usually does. Did he make it to the tree too?
Made it to the temple of Bel Shambhala.
Rincewind choked on his wine. His ears tried to crawl into his head in terror of the syllables they had just heard. The Soul Eater. The Soul Eater. His number lieth between 7 and 9. It is twice 4. Rincewind quoted, his mind frozen with fear. Oh no. Where's the temple?
Upwards towards the center of the forest.
The dryad stood up and stretched out her hand.
I am Dryad. Come with me and watch your friend's fate.
A staircase, broad as a major highway, wound up through the tree, with vast rooms leading off at every landing. Sourceless yellow light was everywhere. We were in a tree, Rincewind asked.
We are.
Dryeye laughed.
I can see into your mind, false wizard. You went to Dryad. Do you not know that what you belittle by the name tree is but the mere 4-dimensional analogue of a whole multi-dimensional universe which... No, I can see you do not. I should have realized that you weren't a real wizard.
Something made Rincewind turn around. There were 3 he-dryads behind him. They were as naked as the woman and unarmed. That last fact was irrelevant, however. They looked at him with wooden menace. Their skins were the colour of walnut husks, and under it, muscles bulged like sacks of melons. He turned around again and grinned weakly at Dryeye. I'm not rescued, am I? I'm captured, right?
Of course.
And you're not letting me go? Dryeye shook her head.
You heard the truth. But you are lucky. Your friend is going to meet Bel Shambhala. You will only die.
From behind, two hands gripped his shoulders in much the same way that an old tree root coils relentlessly around a pebble. There was a vast empty space like a hall, its roof lost in the golden haze. The endless stair ran right through it. Several hundred dryads parted respectfully when Drue-Eli approached, and stared through Rincewind as he was propelled further behind.
Incompetent wizard,
said Drue-Eli.
see some magic, not your weasel-faced tame magic, but root and branch magic, the old magic, wild magic. Watch.
50 or so of the females formed a tight cluster, joined hands, and walked backwards until they formed the circumference of a large circle. The rest of the dryads began a low chant. Then, at a nod from Drue-Eli, the circle began to spin widdershins. As the pace began to quicken and the complicated threads of the chant began to rise, Rincewind felt the familiar sticky prickling in the scalp that indicated the build-up of a heavy charge of raw enchantment in the vicinity. And so he was not utterly amazed when a few seconds later a shaft of vivid octarine light speared down from the invisible ceiling and focused, crackling, in the centre of the circle. There it formed an image of a storm-swept, tree-girt hill with a temple on its crest. Rain streamed off the black walls of the temple. The only sign of life was the horse tethered outside. It wasn't Twoflower's horse. It was a white charger with hooves the size of meat dishes and leather harness aglitter with ostentatious gold ornamentation. It was currently enjoying a nose bag.
The sender of 8 has 2 for dinner, it seems,
said Drue-Eli. She waved a hand. The focus of the image moved inwards, darted through a great octagonal archway, and sped along the corridor within. There was a figure there, sidling along stealthily with its back against one wall. There was no mistaking that shape. I'd seen it many times. The wide chest, the neck like a tree trunk, surprisingly small head under its wild thatch of black hair looking like a tomato in a coffin. He could put a name to the creeping figure, and that name was Harun the Barbarian. Harun was one of the Circle C's more durable heroes, a fighter of dragons, a despoiler of temples, a hired sword, the king post of every street brawl. He could even, unlike many heroes of Rincewind's acquaintance, speak words of more than 2 syllables, given time and maybe a hint or two. There was a sound on the edge of Rincewind's hearing. It sounded like several skulls bouncing down the steps of some distant dungeon.
Who is that false wizard?
Said Drue-Eli, pointing at the hovering image. I am a real wizard, snarled Rincewind. He stamped a foot petulantly.
Indeed,
said the dryad.
Then let us see you pass a spell.
Began Rincewind. The fact was that since the ancient and mysterious spell had squatted in his mind, he'd been unable to remember even the simplest cantrip for, say, killing cockroaches or scratching the small of his back without using his hands. It was perhaps untrue to say that he'd learned the spell. It had learnt him. The episode had led to his expulsion from Unseen University, because for a bet he had dared to open the pages of the last remaining copy of the creator's own grimoire, the Octavo. The spell had leapt out of the page and instantly burrowed deeply into his mind, from whence even the combined talents of the Faculty of Medicine had been unable to coax it. Precisely which one it was they were also unable to ascertain, except that it was one of the 8 basic spells that were intricately interwoven with the very fabric of time and space itself. Since then, it had been showing a worrying tendency, when Rincewind was feeling run down or especially threatened, to try and get itself said.
A spell would do,
said Drue-Eli, watching him curl his lips in a frenzy of anger and embarrassment. The spell chose that moment to vault into the temporarily abandoned saddle of Rincewind's consciousness. I do know a spell, he said wearily.
Yes, written,
said Drue-Eli. Rincewind wasn't sure that he dared, although the spell was trying to take control of his tongue. "You said you could read my mind," he said.
Jeg smell om him.
"You said you could read my mind," he said. "Read it!" She stepped forward, looking mockingly into his eyes. A smile froze. Her hands raised protectively, she crouched back. From her throat came a sound of pure terror. Rincewind looked around. The rest of the Dryads were also backing away. What had he done? Something terrible, apparently. There was a brilliant flash. There was a sudden darkness. There was a vaguely Rincewind-shaped violet shadow dwindling to a point and winking out. There was nothing at all. Harun the Barbarian crept soundlessly along the corridors, which were lit with a light so violet that it was almost black. Earlier in the afternoon, he had espied a chest by the side of the track while riding through this benighted forest. Its top was invitingly open, displaying much gold. But when he'd leapt off his horse to approach it, the chest had sprouted legs and had gone trotting off into the forest, stopping again a few hundred yards away. Now, after several hours of teasing pursuit, he had lost it in these hell-lit tunnels. The unpleasant carvings and occasional disjointed skeletons he passed held no fear for Harun. They were in a day's work. He spent a great deal of time in similar situations, seeking gold, or demons, or distressed virgins, and relieving them respectively of their owners, their lives, and at least one cause of their distress. Observe Harun, as he leaps cat-footed across a suspicious tunnel mouth. Even in this violet light, his skin gleams coppery. There is much gold about his person, in the form of anklets and wristlets, but otherwise he is naked, except for a leopard skin loincloth. In his right hand, he carried the magical black sword, Karim, which was forged from a thunderbolt and has a soul but suffers no scabbard. Harun had stolen it only 3 days before from the impregnable palace of the Archmandrite of Bit-Tuni, and he was already regretting it. It was beginning to get on his nerves.
I tell you, it went down that last passage on the right,
hissed Karim, in a voice like the scrape of a blade over stone. "Be silent!"
All I said was,
"Shut up!" And Two Flower? He was lost. He knew that. Either the building was much bigger than it looked, or he was now on some wide underground level without having gone down any steps, or, as he was beginning to suspect, the inner dimensions of the place disobeyed a fairly basic rule of architecture by being bigger than the outside. And why all these strange lights? They were 8-sided crystals set at regular intervals in the walls and ceiling. They shed a rather unpleasant glow that didn't so much illuminate as outline the darkness.
I don't like it,
said the picture imp from his box around Two Flower's neck. "Why not?" inquired Two Flower.
it's weird.
"But you're a demon. Demons can't call things weird. I mean, what's weird to a demon?"
Oh, you know,
said the demon cautiously.
things, stuff.
Two Flower looked up at the ceiling. "What was that?" he asked. "Didn't you hear something?"
Me? Here? No, not a thing.
The demon insisted. It jerked back into its box and slammed the door. Two Flower tapped on it. The door opened a crack. "It sounded like a stone moving," he explained. The door banged shut. Two Flower shrugged. "Oh, the place is probably falling to..." Two Flower stopped. The reason for this was the bright point of light that had popped into existence a few feet from his eyes. It grew rapidly, and after a few seconds was the tiny bright shape of a man. At this stage, it began to make a noise. Or rather, Two Flower started to hear the noise it had been making all along. It sounded like a sliver of a scream, caught in one long instant of time. The iridescent man was doll-sized now, a tortured shape tumbling in slow motion while hanging in mid-air. it was beginning to look like Rincewind. The wizard's mouth was open, and his face was brilliantly lit by the light of... what? Now, the turning wizard was half man-sized. At that point, the growth was faster. There was a sudden crowded moment, a rush of air, and an explosion of sound. Rincewind tumbled out of the air, screaming. He hit the floor hard, choked, then rolled over with his head cradled in his arms and his body curled up tightly. When the dust had settled, Two-Flower reached out gingerly and tapped the wizard on the shoulder. The human ball rolled up tighter. "It's me," explained Two-Flower helpfully. In one movement, Rincewind unrolled and bounced up in front of the little man, his hands gripping his shoulders desperately. "Don't say it!" he hissed. "Don't say what?" "The number!" "Number? Yes, number! Between 7 and 9. 4 plus 4. What, 8? Rincewind's hands clapped over the man's mouth. "Say it, and we're doomed. Just don't think about it, right? Trust me." After the first age of magic, the disposal of grimoires began to become a severe problem in the Discworld. A spell is still a spell, even when imprisoned temporarily in parchment and ink. It has potency. This isn't a problem while the book's owner still lives. Spell books leak magic. Various solutions have been tried. Countries near the rim simply loaded down the books of dead mages with leaden pentalphers and threw them over the edge. Near the hub, less satisfactory alternatives were available. Inserting the offending books in canisters of negatively polarised Octyron and sinking them in the fathomless depths of the sea was one. Burial in deep caves on land was earlier ruled out after some districts complained of walking trees and five-headed cats. But before long, the magic seeped out, and eventually fishermen complained of shoals of invisible fish or psychic clams. A temporary solution was the construction in various centres of magical lore of large rooms made of denatured Octyron, which is impervious to most forms of magic. Here, the more critical grimoires could be stored until their potency had attenuated. That was how they came to be at Unseen University, the Octar, greatest of all grimoires, formerly owned by the creator of the universe. It was this book that Rincewind had once opened for a bet. He'd only a second to stare at a page before setting off various alarm spells, but that was time enough for one spell to leap from it and settle in his memory like a toad in a stone. "We're doomed," Rincewind stated. "We've been walking around all night. I tell you, this place is a spider web. It doesn't matter which way we go, we'll end up in the centre. What we've got to do is find this Bel-Shamharoth person and he'll let us out," said Two-Flower. Rincewind glared at him in the hellish purple glow. "Find Bel-Shamharoth," he said. "Yes, we don't have to get involved." "Find the Soul Render and not get involved? Just give him a nod, I suppose, and ask the way to the exit. Explain things to the sender of..." Rincewind bit off the end of the word just in time and finished, "You're insane! Hey, come back!" He darted down the passage after Two-Flower, and after a few moments came to a halt with a groan. The violet light was intense here, giving everything new and unpleasant colours. This wasn't a passage. It was a wide room with walls to a number that Rincewind didn't dare to contemplate. Rincewind saw, a little way off, a low altar with the same number of signs as 4 times 2. It didn't occupy the centre of the room. The centre was occupied by a huge stone slab with twice as many sides as a square. It looked massive. In the strange light, it appeared to be slightly tilted, with one edge standing proud of the slabs around it. Two-Flower was standing on it. "Hey, Rincewind, look what's here!" The luggage came ambling down one of the edges that radiated from the wall. "That's great," said Rincewind. "Fine. This out." Was all honest. "Yes," he said, few pictures. Just let me fit the attachment. I said now. Rincewind stopped. Harun the Barbarian was standing in the passage mouth directly opposite him, a great black sword held in one hand-sized fist. Said Harun uncertainly. Aha, yes, said Rincewind. Harun, isn't it? Long time no see. What brings you here? Harun pointed to the luggage. That, he said. Then he added, in a tone that combined statement, claim, threat, and ultimatum, mine. It belongs to Two Flower here, said Rincewind. Here's a tip. Don't touch it. It dawned on him that this was precisely the wrong thing to say, but Harun had already pushed Two Flower away and was reaching for the luggage. The bridge sprouted legs, backed away, and raised its lid threateningly. In the uncertain light, Rincewind thought he could see rows of enormous teeth, white as bleached beechwood. Harun, he said quickly, there's something I want to tell you. What? He said. It's about numbers. Look, you know if you add 7 and 1, or 3 and 5, or take 2 from 10, you get a number. While you're here, don't say it, and we might all stand a chance of getting out of here alive. Who is he? Asked Two Flower. He was holding a cage in his hands, dredged from the bottommost depths of the luggage. It appeared to be full of sulking pink lizards. Harun, said Harun proudly. Then he looked at Rincewind. What? He said. Just don't say it, okay? Said Rincewind. The sword in Harun's hand suddenly spoke in a voice like a claw being scraped across glass. Strange. Why can't he say 8? 8, 8, 8, 8, said the echoes. And although they became softer, they refused to die away. They bounced from wall to wall, crossing and recrossing, and the violet light flickered in time with the sound. You did it! Screamed Rincewind. I said you shouldn't say 8! He stopped, appalled at himself. But the word was out now and joined its colleagues in the general susurration. The air suddenly seemed to be thicker than treacle. A charge of magic, bigger than he had ever seen, was building up. When he moved in painful slow motion, his limbs left trails of golden sparks that traced their shape in the air. Behind him, there was a rumble as the great octagonal slab rose into the air, exposing the blackness of a pit, hung for a moment on one edge, and crashed down on the floor. Something thin and black snaked out of the pit and wrapped itself around Rincewind's ankle. He screamed as he landed heavily on the vibrating flagstones. The tentacle started to pull him across the floor. There was a noise like a singing saw, and the pressure on Rincewind's legs abruptly ceased. He turned his head and saw Harun, crouched by the pit, his sword a blur as it hacked at the tentacles racing out towards him. Two Flower was feverishly attaching the cage of subdued lizards to the picture box, which he'd mounted on a tripod. "I've just got to get a picture of this," he muttered. "It's stupendous. Can you hear me, Imp?" The picture imp opened his tiny hatch, glanced momentarily at the scene around the pit, and vanished into the box. Rincewind jumped up as something touched his leg and brought his heel down on a questing tentacle. "Come on," he said. "Hey," Two Flower said, "it's got my luggage." Before Rincewind could restrain him, Two Flower ran around the edge of the pit to the box, which was being dragged across the floor while its lid snapped ineffectually at the tentacle that held it. Harun himself was already an indistinct shape amid the tightening coils. Even as Rincewind stared in horror, the hero's sword was wrenched from his grasp and hurled against a wall. Rincewind didn't move. He was looking at the thing rising out of the pit. It was an enormous eye, and it was staring directly at him. He whimpered as a tentacle fastened itself around his waist. The words of the spell rose unbidden in his throat. He opened his mouth as in a dream. Another tentacle shot out like a whip and coiled around his throat, choking him. Staggering and gasping, Rincewind was dragged across the floor. One flailing arm caught Two Flowers' picture box as it skittered past on its tripod. He snatched it up instinctively. If only he could get enough room to swing it against the eye. In front of him, the lizards stirred in their cages on the picture box. Rincewind saw that they had overlarge tails that were bluish-white and, he realised, throbbing alarmingly. As he was drawn towards the eye, the terror-struck Rincewind raised the box protectively, and at the same time heard the picture imp say,
They're about ripe now. Can't hold them any longer. Everyone smile, please.
There was a flash of light so white and so bright, it didn't seem like light at all. Bel-Sham-Haroth screamed. The tentacles, hurling their various cargoes around the room, bunched up protectively in front of the abused eye. The whole mass dropped into the pit, and a moment later, the big slab was snatched up and slammed into place, leaving a number of thrashing limbs trapped around the edge. Two Flower was in a crumpled heap against the wall. At least he was groaning. The wizard pulled himself across the floor painfully and whispered, Why were they so bright? Muttered Two Flower. God, my head. Too bright, said Rincewind. He looked across the floor to the cage on the picture box. The lizards inside, now noticeably thinner, were watching him with interest. The salamanders, moaned Two Flower. The picture will be overexposed, I know it. Salamanders? Of course. Standard attachment. Rincewind tried to remember the little he knew about. They were magical creatures. They also had no mouths, since they subsisted entirely on the nourishing quality of the octarine wavelength in the Discworld sunlight, which they absorbed through their skins. Rincewind nodded grimly. With all the octarine light in this magical place, the creatures had been gorging themselves, and then nature had taken its course. He looked around at a sudden grinding noise, and a voice like a carving knife cutting through silk said, This is very undignified. Shut up, said Hurun. He was using Karing to leave at the top off the altar. He looked up at Rincewind and grinned. Mighty magic, commented the barbarian, pushing down heavily on the complaining sword with a hand the size of a ham. Now we share the treasure, eh? How do you know there's treasure in there? Rincewind said. Hurun heaved and managed to hook his fingers under the stone. He gritted his teeth. The stone swung up and landed heavily on the floor. Something struck Rincewind's hand heavily. It was a piece of stone with 5 + 3 sides. He looked up at the ceiling. Should it be sagging like that? Hurun hummed a little tune as he began to pull crumbling leather from the desecrated altar. The air crackled, fluoresced, hummed. Intangible winds gripped the wizard's robe, flapping it out in eddies of blue and green sparks. Around Rincewind's head, mad, half-formed spirits howled and gibbered as they were sucked past. Two Flower staggered up, bent double in the teeth of the astral gale. What the hell is this? He shouted. Rincewind half-turned. Immediately the howling wind caught him, nearly pitching him over. Poltergeist eddies spinning in the rushing air snatched at his feet. Hurun's arm shot out and caught him. A moment later, he and Two Flower had been dragged into the lee of the ravaged altar and laid panting on the floor. Toot, murmured Rincewind, while overhead the roof cracked and shifted. Hurun glanced up at the widening cracks in the ceiling and sighed. Then he put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. His warhorse cantered through a creaking archway and reared up by its master, its mane streaming in the gale. The barbarian pulled himself to his feet and slung his treasure bags into a sack that hung from the saddle, then hauled himself onto the beast's back. He reached down and grabbed Two Flower by the scruff of his neck, dragging him across the saddle tree. As the horse turned around, The horse pounded sure-footed along the tunnels, leaping sudden slides of rubble and adroitly sidestepping huge stones as they thundered down from the straining roof. Rincewind, clinging on grimly, looked behind. Close behind, speeding through the flickering violet light, were a large, ominous-looking chest and a picture box that skittered along dangerously on its 3 legs. They reached the outer air a moment before the octagonal arch finally broke and smashed into the flags. Behind them, a column of dust rose as the temple collapsed in on itself. But they didn't look back. Two-Flower was helping the heroes sort through the treasure stolen from the temple. Rincewind was trying to shut his ears to the grating voice behind him. It was no use.
And then I belonged to the Pasha of Red Durat and played a prominent part in the Battle of the Great Nerf, which is where I received the slight nick you may have noticed some 2/3 of the way up my blade,
Karing was saying.
I'm soon home now, so I'm gonna turn off the stream. Gonna be listening more tomorrow when I drive to work, I guess. Seems to be a fun book. Yeah. Goodbye for now.